Hello everyone, my name is Yara and today I'm going to be talking about the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series. So the first time I read Percy Jackson, it was in the summer. I was 11 years old and I was scanning the library for books I could read for summer reading, and I came across The Lightning Thief. It's kind of funny because what actually drew me to pick up the book when I saw the cover was the fact that it was the movie tie-in cover, and I recognized the movie poster because I think the movie had just come out, or like a year before had just come out, and I hadn't seen it, but I was curious about it. So I read the first chapter right then and there in the library on the floor, and I was absolutely in love. I made my parents drive me to Barnes & Noble's to buy the next few books. I was obsessed, and to this day, it is still one of my favorite things, if not my favorite thing in the entire world. And for the next 3 years or so, I used to reread the series every summer because it kind of became this sort of comfort read and this tradition I had with myself. But I stopped doing that when I was 14, so the last time that I read this series was 5 years ago. And you'd think, having read the series 3 times, that I would pretty much know the ins and outs of what's happening and my feelings on it, but in reality, I don't remember a lot of what happened, mostly in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th books, because those books don't really have adaptations. Even though the adaptations suck, I still remembered what was wrong with them and what actually happened in the book. And I also realized that 19-year-old me was very different from 12, 13, and 14-year-old me. And I was really curious to see what my takeaways would be from the series going into it now versus when I was reading it back then. So that's what I did. This past August, I reread all 5 books, and it was actually a really interesting experience. Of course, I enjoyed it a lot. I love these books, but I actually learned a lot more about kind of why these books are so successful and kind of tried to analyze them a little bit more than my younger self probably did when I was just reading for enjoyment. And as a warning before we start, I am going to spoil all of these books. The extent of details I'm going to go into, I don't really know how far I'm going to go, but I will be discussing significant plot points in the series, so if you don't want to be spoiled, if you haven't read the series yet, please go do it. And so yeah, please leave and go read the series and then come back. So without further ado, let's talk about Percy Jackson and the Olympians the 4th time around. So this past semester, I took a class on fairy tales, and pretty much the theme of that entire class was looking at how stories aimed at children, whether they be fairy tales or middle grade novels or kids movies or kids books, they all kind of serve to help children cope with some sort of experience, some sort of trauma that they are going to go through in life. And whether it was unconscious or conscious, that mindset kind of seeped into my reading of this series, and it was kind of interesting. I don't really know if I noticed this the first time I read the series, but each book kind of has a distinct theme that is trying to convey and a kind of a lesson that is trying to convey. And I think it's pretty subtle for a younger audience, but now that I'm older, I can kind of see the way Rick Riordan was weaving things together and piecing narratives together to convey this message and these lessons about humanity in these stories about these demigods. So one thing that I took away that I didn't actually realize when I was rereading the series, I more realized it when I was watching the Lightning Thief musical, which I saw this past February, and that is the themes of abandonment and resentment. Now, I'm pretty positive that I probably recognized this the first time I read it, but I think it just hit a little harder now, knowing the extent to which this abandonment and resentment shaped the characters. It really shows how neglected these kids feel and how abandoned they feel by their parents, because they never knew who they were for most of their lives. And this theme is present from The Lightning Thief all the way until the end of the series in The Last Olympian, and it's present in every single one of the characters that we meet, or any single one of the demigods that we meet. Going through that experience growing up feeling neglected influences every single one of their decisions and every single one of their personalities, though it influences every single person in a different way, which is really interesting when you see the contrast between the protagonist and the antagonist, because they have this connection, they have this similarity between them, but you see how they can go in such different routes and act in such different ways. And we see that resentment in Percy. He's pretty jaded, pretty cynical, pretty angry. And we also see that with Annabeth, who's angry at both of her parents. But they do find this temporary solace in Camp Half-Blood, where they can bond with campers who have shared their experience and can form the connections that they long to have. And for a kid reading this who may feel neglected, who may feel misunderstood and angry, that's really important for them to see that there is a possibility for hope and for a good community that they can find, even if it's just in the characters for now, that they can bond with these characters. And that's in addition to the fact that these characters have disabilities with ADHD and dyslexia, so someone reading that could really relate to that and feel included. And what's cool is that Rick Riordan shows that while this may be enough for some kids, to some it's not. Like Luke. Luke's betrayal was one of the most interesting parts of The Lightning Thief because he's just like every other camper. But he doesn't want to take what he's been given. He doesn't want to be exploited by his dad, by the gods. He's angry and he wants revenge. And establishing that right from the very beginning, the fact that the protagonists and the antagonists are connected by this similar upbringing, by this similar experience, makes the villains so much more compelling because you can see where they came from and how they could turn. And that idea is developed in every single book, and we see that it's because of the kids who felt abandoned and turned against Camp Half-Blood that Kronos rose in the first place. He never would have rose if he wasn't able to get the support of these demigods. And I think that's why one of my favorite scenes in this entire series is when Percy denies Zeus's offer to become a god, and instead he wants his wish to be that the gods take accountability for what they've done and to welcome their kids and to accept their kids and claim their kids. Like, that was so freaking powerful and so freaking satisfying, given that this entire conflict started because of what the gods failed to do. Because Rick could have easily just left it at this sort of bringing awareness to that issue, to talking about that issue, to exploring it within the characters, but the fact that he made the gods take accountability, or Percy made the gods take accountability, it's so reassuring to an audience that their feelings are not only validated, but also compensated for, in a way. I meant that first part to be just about the Lightning Thief, but I ended up talking about the whole series in Last Olympian, but whatever. Now we're gonna go on to the Sea of Monsters. So this also has pretty similar development to the Lightning Thief. Like I said, that theme is present throughout all the books. So then I forgot that Sea of Monsters explores is developing Clarice's character more. Like in the first book, she's this arrogant, mean bully, and she still kind of has that character, or she will always have that kind of character that's kind of abrasive. But you also get to see more layers from her, especially as she gets so much pressure from her dad to complete the quest. You see how much self-worth she ties to her father's approval and to being able to be successful in the quest and show others that she is capable. And I really liked that because even this character that we just kind of threw off to the side, we didn't like, she was kind of one-dimensional in the first book, we see that she also has a story and has a background that is like these other characters, and she's dealing with it in her own way. The other takeaway that I'm sure I noticed the first time, but it really hit hard this time reading it. It was this passage that Chiron was telling Percy at the end of the book, and it was pretty much after the quest, and Percy was wondering, why does he have this responsibility? He's just a kid. Why is he responsible for saving the world? And that's understandable because he's living in a world with these immensely powerful gods who can do so much more than he can, a little 13-year-old kid. So why does he have to have this responsibility? And Chiron pretty much tells him that because he's part of the human world and the godly world, that's what makes him important. He says, you can be harmed by both and you can affect both. That's what makes heroes so special. You fight the battles humanity must win every generation in order to stay human. It kind of embodies the idea, to quote the musical, the things that make you different are the very things that make you strong. And like, it might be cheesy to some, but like, it really hit hard. I think especially the idea of being part of both worlds, that honestly resonates harder now than it did back then. So I'm 19, and in these couple years, it's really difficult because you're no longer a kid anymore, but you're not quite an adult yet, in terms of like maturity, in terms of level of stability. But suddenly you have so much pressures around you to make a difference in the world and to affect the future, which is a lot of pressure. But the fact that we can resonate with both youth and childhood and adulthood, that's a really interesting perspective that makes us powerful and makes our voices valid. And like, you know, I just needed that reassurance in my life. So now we're on to the Titan's Curse, and in this one, there's a very distinct tonal shift. The first two books, while they deal with darker topics, they're kind of put off to the side or more subtle and more ingrained in the characters rather than fully upfront in the foreground, I guess you could say. But Titan's Curse changes that. That may have to do with the fact that it's set in winter, so it is kind of darker and drearier. But it's probably more realistically the fact that the main message and theme that I took away from it was about failure and dealing with the consequences of your actions. And we see this really early on in the book because Percy's impulsive actions are the reason why Annabeth is caught and has to hold the earth for the Titan army. And not only does Percy have to deal with his personal guilt because of this, but he also has to deal with Thalia's reprimanding of him. I love Thalia. She's probably one of the reasons why I love this book so much. And I think it's because of the dynamic that she introduces, because she's essentially Percy's equal. Percy doesn't really have someone who is the same as him. No one else, at least in the first two books, was a child of the big three. No one else could relate to the pressure that he had because of the big prophecy, and no one else had his just strength and his power. But then Thalia comes along, and now you have these two people who butt heads. They're so used to being the leaders, they're so used to their actions being right, and so they butt heads. I think as the reader, we relate a lot to Percy. We insert ourselves as Percy because it is a first-person narrative. And so it's extra hurtful when you have to not only feel personally responsible for something, but be told that you are responsible and that your impulsive actions and that your decisions are the reason why someone got hurt. But I also think that's a really important message to send, because for his first two books, Percy's been flying by the seat of his pants. He trusts his gut and everyone else trusts his gut. But that's not always gonna work, and he has to realize that. And then later on, when Bianca dies, he goes through a similar experience because Nico entrusted him with Bianca's safety, and he failed Nico. And I think it's also like an extra strain on Percy because he's 14 in this book, he's nearing 16. Every year he needs to prepare more and more for his eventual decision, or at least he doesn't know if it's gonna be him or Thalia, but one of them has to. And so the fact that the nearer he gets to the point where he's supposed to be his best, that he fails, it's really scary, but I love that dynamic. But it is pretty indicative of Percy's character that he doesn't let himself wallow in guilt and wallow in sadness. Understanding the consequences of what he does and what he may do helps him better help his friends in the future, which is also another good message to send. So Bianca's death is kind of a good segue into the Battle of the Labyrinth, which has a few main themes that I took away from it. I'm repeating myself. I keep saying I took away. Obviously, I took away. This is my video. In the Battle of the Labyrinth, we're mostly following Percy's storyline and their adventures in the Battle of the Labyrinth, but we also get to see a little bit of Nico's journey. And he makes me so sad because he was so cute in the Titan's Curse. He was so excited about the Greek gods with his little mytho-magic game, only to be torn down at every single second to the fact where he doesn't even feel like he belongs there anymore. And I think Rick Riordan was trying to show that Nico's issue with dealing with death is the lack of control that it has, because even despite the fact that he is the son of Hades, he has power over death in the underworld, and yet he still can't bring his sister back. Or rather, she chooses not to, and he just doesn't want to accept that, or he has trouble accepting that. And that's a very relatable thing, I think, in any part of your life. There's always going to be instances where you feel so frustrated and so powerless because you can't control what happens in the world. And the theme that relates to Percy, Annabeth, Tyson, and Grover's journey, that's pretty much all revolve around mentors and role models failing you. Actually, I think it's more of the other three, not Percy. So it's Tyson and Briareys, Annabeth and Daedalus, and Grover and Pan. And all three of those role models failed in the eyes of the people who idolized them. At least initially, like Briareys didn't come to help, Daedalus was hiding selfishly in the labyrinth and avoiding death instead of helping people when he could have. And Pan chose to be forgotten and not help restore nature. And that's highly really depressing, the fact that these people who the kids looked up to and who motivated them to be better and stronger, they gave up. They thought the world was too hard and they want to take the easy way out. And so that was a really big turning point for these characters because they realized that they have to take responsibilities. They can't rely on people who are older and wiser than them. They have to take it upon themselves to change the world. And in the end, they all did redeem themselves. Briareys came to the fight, and Daedalus also came to the fight. I forgot. And Pan just kind of instilled more confidence and power in Grover. And even though the role models did come through in the end, it's still very clear that it's the heroes, the Half-Bloods, who are leading this movement and taking up that responsibility. And that's another thing that resonates a lot more with me now than it did back then. And it's kind of like what I said before about how at this age you're not a kid anymore, but you're not ready to be a full adult, and so you still rely on figures who are older than you and wiser than you to fight your fights almost. But there comes a time when you have to realize that you need to step up, especially in this social political sphere that we are at this moment. That's really important, and we're seeing it happen right now, where these kids and teens and young adults are fighting for what we believe in because the older generations are failing us. I don't think I cried at Pan's death in any of the 3 times that I read it before, but it really hit me now, and I shed a tear because of what he said about stepping up. So I mentioned a few things about Last Olympian before, but I'll say a few more things now, and they mostly revolve around the fact that Luke is the hero in the prophecy. That was a twist that I did not see coming the first time, and to this day I think it's a really cool twist. It's kind of like a subversion of the Chosen One trope, because yes, Percy is the half-blood of the eldest gods, but he's not the hero in the end. He's not the chosen one who can save the day. He is integral to saving the day. Without him, they would not have gotten very far. And that was not because of some prophecy, though. That was because of Percy's own motivation and own drive to help his city and to help his people. So in addition to the whole accountability for what the gods did, the message that I took from Last Olympian was that you don't know who's going to be the hero. Or I guess you could say anybody could be the hero. Luke made bad choices in the beginning. He was driven by anger and resentment and turned to the dark side. But in the end, he realized that he was being used, and he did what he could to finish the fight, and he sacrificed himself. And I think what makes Luke's redemption really believable and powerful is the fact that from the very beginning, it was established that Percy and Luke have very similar feelings. They have that connection of feeling angry and feeling resentful. But Percy used it in a constructive way, whereas Luke went in a destructive way. But since there's that connection, I don't think it's unbelievable for Luke to realize what he did wrong and try to go the other side. Does he go all the way? No. He's not absolved of all the things that he did wrong before. But he tried to do what was right in the end, which was really powerful, in my opinion. And just to finish the Nico storyline, I think The Last Olympian for Nico was about feeling accepted and feeling wanted, because Percy tries to make him understand that he can come to camp and that he can be a part of them, that he's not different. And I think Nico needed to go through that development to see that the world can change the way they look at you, the way they see you, and that you can be accepted if you accept yourself and you welcome that acceptance. I guess just one more thing that I have to add that's not really specific to a book or the content, but more of Rick's writing style, is that a lot of times I see people disregard this series or devalue this series because it's written in a kind of simplistic way. And I used to always try to convince people that no, it is also written for older people. And reading it again, I can definitely recognize that it reads pretty young, especially the first 2. The last 3 get a little bit more mature. But in general, it reads pretty young. It's not some literary fiction, but I don't think that means it's worth any less to read it. Just because it's not written for me does not mean that I can't resonate with what's happening. Like, you saw my reactions. There are things that resonate with me more now than they did when I read it as a kid. And I don't think simple and straightforward language is worse than complex language, because Rick Riordan is able to tell a really good story that has really good messages and themes, and pretty dark themes that can resonate with younger readers, that they can understand. Being able to convey that to a young audience is a really good feat. It's like Pixar movies. Pixar movies are made for kids, and they are made to be understood by kids. But the messages and the themes can resonate with kids and adults. I don't know, that was just something on my mind that I wanted to say. So that's pretty much all I have to say about Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I can with 100% certainty say that this series changed my life. I generally don't know what kind of person I would be, the type of humor I would have, where I would be in life if I hadn't discovered this series. It truly means a lot to me, and I had a really enjoyable time reading it for the 4th time. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.